Let's swatch our Watercolor Essentials palette. First, I'm going to add a couple dots of water to each pan of my palette using my pipette. You could always use a spray bottle and give them a quick spritz, or of course, use a couple drops of water and your brush to get each one activated. Just make sure it's a clean brush and clean water. There's no right or wrong way to make swatches of your palettes. It's just something that comes in handy for future use when you want to go back and mix colors or look and see what you have. Let's open our sketchbooks to a blank page. I like using a page toward the front because then I can have it for future reference and it's always right there at the front of my book. Dip your brush into some clean water, make sure it's not too saturated, and we are going to pick up the first color. In this palette, my first color is Cadmium Red Deep Hue. I like this as a basic primary red. It's a tiny touch more warm and orange tone, but still a very true classic primary red. Now I'm gonna rinse my brush off, tap it off just a little bit to make sure it's not too saturated, and go in for color number 2. This shade is Alizarin Crimson Hue. It is more of a blue red, kind of a deeper cherry red, and one of my personal favorites. Rinsing off my brush and getting ready for the next color, it is of course my favorite in the palette. It is Permanent Rose. You know I love my pinks, so this is always the first one to go in my palette, and I am constantly having to refill my pinks. Here we have Dioxazine Purple. It is very dark and pigmented. Make sure you are careful with this one when mixing colors. A little bit will go a long way. The first blue in our palette is the darker of the two, and it is Ultramarine. It's a gorgeous darker blue version of a true blue, and it can be used in so many ways. Moving on to Cerulean Blue Hue, this is giving you a bit more of that cyan vibe. It's really going to brighten those greens and purples and give you that really bold CMY look. For our first green, we have Hooker's Green Dark. This is a little bit more of a darker kind of foresty green, and it lends a little bit blue. It's a little bit cooler toned. For our lighter green shade, we have Sap Green. This is a little bit more of a yellow green, and I use it a ton in my florals. This lovely yellow is Cadmium Yellow Hue. It is a bit of a stronger, deeper yellow, and I really prefer that when it comes to mixing because it holds its color a bit better. Next up, we have Cadmium Orange Hue. I'm not a huge fan of the color orange, but I use it a lot mixing with reds and yellows for my fall florals. It's really pretty. Moving into our browns, we do have 2 different shades. This first one is Burnt Sienna. You'll notice I have 2 browns in this palette and no black, white, or gray. When it comes to watercolors, you should never use white because it'll make them look chalky. And when it comes to blacks or grays, I find that it's so much more beautiful when you create your own. You can really control the warm or cool undertones, and it's just so much more beautiful. And this last color is Burnt Umber. And with that, our swatches for the Watercolor Essentials palette are complete. Let's make a traditional red, yellow, and blue color wheel. Starting off with our red, we are going to make a little circle of primary red right at the top of our color wheel. It's very important through each step of the process to make sure you clean your brush in between each color because we're mixing them together and you don't want to mess up the colors that we are mixing. Next, I'm going to drop in another small circle using Ultramarine Blue. We're going to start off by building a triangle out of our primary colors. The reason I'm doing it this way instead of a typical pie chart that you might see as a color wheel is because my perfectionism gets all stressed out when I try to make the wedges and they're all different sizes and then you have to count how many wedges and figure it out, and it's just too much. So we're going to drop in our yellow here and create a little triangle. Now that we've dropped in our primary colors, we are going to work on our secondary mixes. I'm going to drop a little bit of red in 2 little spots because we are going to be mixing it with 2 colors, the blue and the yellow. When mixing your colors, make sure you remember that it's not 50-50. It is not a 1-to-1 ratio. Here I added just a touch of the blue, but it wasn't quite enough, and then I overcompensated because I added too much blue. So I'm going to go back in with my red and send that purple a little back more toward the red direction to get the really kind of mid-tone purple shade that I'm looking for. And with a tiny bit of blue, I'm going to try to cool this down just a little bit. Wasn't quite enough, so I'm going to add a tiny little bit more blue in here, and then we will place it in the circle halfway between the red and the blue, but just out a little tiny bit so we make a circle and not a diamond. Of course, it's your color wheel. You can really do this in any shape or any order that you want. And by in whatever order you want, I mean the colors all have to stay obviously in the color wheel order. But if you want to start with blue or orange or purple or whatever first, it's your color wheel. I already started mixing our yellow into our red to get an orange, and I'm going to go a little bit more yellow. It usually will take more yellow than red to get a nice orange, unless you want a red orange, but we'll get to that with tertiary colors. And here we will add our little orange dot in between the red and the yellow. And now it is time to wash off our brush and start with green. Remembering that our blue is stronger than our yellow, I'm going to go in very gently with a little tiny bit of blue. And whoa, that was definitely not enough. So we're gonna have to go in a little bit more with the blue, but making sure we really don't overcompensate, sending this whole thing to blue. I didn't make much of this green, so I'm gonna add a little bit of water in to thin this paint out just a little bit, and then we'll go in and make our green circle. Moving on to our tertiary colors. Tertiary colors are when you mix a primary color with the secondary color that is next to it. So we are going to start with adding a little bit of red to our original purple, and we are going to make a red violet. Just like with mixing any color, the trick here is to make sure we go just red enough, but not too purple, and finding that good in between. And then we will put that little dot in between the two colors on the color wheel. Next up, we have blue violet, so we are going to add some blue into that original purple until we get a good combination that really reflects the values of blue violet. And then we'll add him to the circle. Although color wheels aren't essential, I think it's a good reference to have when mixing more complicated colors. Moving on to green, we are going to add a little bit of yellow and then our original green mixture. Mix those together to make a yellow green, and then we will put them in their little place of the circle. For the next shade, it will of course be blue-green, and we will make sure when we add our blue that we don't go too heavy with the blue, that it completely overcompensates the green, but gives you just enough of kind of that pretty aqua tealy green color. Perfect for a blue-green. Adding our blue-green into the circle, and then we will move on to the oranges. For yellow-orange, we will of course mix yellow and, what's that? Yes, orange. How'd you guess? The biggest challenge when making a color wheel is really making sure that you're getting a true mid color that's halfway between each of the colors and doesn't lean too far one way or the other. Adding our yellow-orange to the circle here, and then we will go in to find a good red-orange. I already overcompensated way too far on the red side, so I am going to cannibalize a little bit of that yellow-orange and kind of mix to get back to that mid-orange-red that I'm really looking for. I'm going to add them to the circle, and then we get to do something really fun. We are going to mix all these leftover colors together with our original primaries to create a gray. I'm going to speed through this process because what's left on your painting mix tray will not be the exact same that's mixed with mine. But really all you're going to do is mix your colors into a muddy mess and then change it based on the primary colors, making it warmer or cooler based on how much blue, yellow, or red you add. And as you mix the colors, you can just kind of tell if it goes to red, then you should probably add a little bit more blue or yellow depending on which direction you want the color to go. And this gives you an opportunity to make a really, really pretty either neutral shade of some sort, whether it's a brown or a tan, or a gray that leans either cool or warm depending on what you need for your exact project. As I'm mixing, you can kind of see that I hesitate every once in a while or make a weird stroke off to the side just to really kind of see what color is on my brush. If I really wanted to, I could have swatched that on the paper itself, but I kind of knew what direction I wanted to head, and I wanted to keep this sheet completely clean with just my swatches and color wheels. So I just kind of left it to my own imagination and did what I wanted. And then right in the middle, I am going to add our perfect neutral custom gray. And there's your red, yellow, blue color wheel. We started off with a red, yellow, blue color wheel, so now let's really shake things up with a cyan, magenta, yellow color wheel. Starting off the top of our triangle, I am adding a little dot of permanent rose. For our cyan, I will be using the shade cerulean blue hue in our next corner, followed by our only yellow in this palette, cadmium yellow hue for our third primary. I am dropping 2 little blobs of magenta on my palette so that we can mix them with the cyan and yellow. Starting with the cyan, we are going to mix up our purple, and here is where you will really start to see the differences between a CMY palette and a red, yellow, blue palette. This is going to give you more of that vibrant, traditional purple that you're expecting when you think about mixing red and blue. Dropping our purple circle here in our color wheel. I am realizing I dropped way too much magenta to make an orange, so I'm going to go in instead with a yellow and then bring in a little bit of the magenta to bring out that orange instead of trying to overcompensate with a whole bunch of yellow, because the yellow will always be weaker than the magenta or the blue. And I'm going to go ahead and drop our orange into our color wheel. Our final secondary color is green, so I will mix up a tiny bit of the blue with a majority of yellow. Again, that blue is going to overpower the yellow, so always start with more yellow and less blue. It is always easier to add blue in than to take it back out. Now that we have a nice vibrant green, I will add the final secondary color into our color wheel. And now it's time to start on the tertiaries. I am splitting this magenta blob up into two and mixing our purple in from earlier to create a red violet, or I guess in this case, a magenta violet. Once your mix gets to a color that you like, you will drop it in between the original two colors in your color wheel to continue the circle. Going in with our blue, I'm going to add it to our purple to create our blue violet for this version of our color wheel. And once I'm happy with the mix, I will add its little dot in between blue and purple in our color circle. Now for the green circle, I'm going to split our little green puddle into two so we can mix it with our two different colors. And then I will start off adding a blue into the first little pile to create our blue-green. The biggest differences that you'll notice in the CMY palette come to the green and the purples. They're a bit closer to the more vibrant greens and purples that you expect in your color mixes. Now for our yellow mixed in with our green, and we will add its little dot there and go into our oranges. Again, we are going to split this orange into two by pulling the orange out of the first one and adding it into our original magenta pile. And we will add its color into our color wheel, and then right about here I'm deciding that that's not quite the color I wanted, so we're going to add a little bit more magenta in to darken that color just a touch and then finish up its little dot before we move on to the yellow-orange version. Last but not least, our final color is yellow-orange. Mixing these two up, finishing up our color wheel, and then we will go in and mix our custom gray. I'm going to speed this part up because the colors I have left on my palette are not going to be the exact colors you have left on your palette. So what you're going to do here is mix all of your colors together until you get a nice muddy color that you will then adjust warmer or cooler by adding more cyan, magenta, or yellow, depending on the color that you're wanting. Here I am adding my gray in the middle, but I'm deciding it's not quite neutral enough, so I'm going to go in with a little tissue, blot that back out, go back in and adjust my shade just a little bit to make it a bit more neutral, and then finish off with my final gray. And there is your CMY color wheel.